Thank you. Good morning, all. Welcome to CyberTech's first ever webinar. My name is Boland Lithebe. I'm the Managing Executive for CyberTech, a division of Altron. We are in the business of cybersecurity, and we have the privilege of having worked with a various number of customers from various sectors when the lockdown started and during the lockdown. And this has given us some insights into the companies that struggled to transition into work from home, the security challenges they experienced, and those that didn't experience the security challenge. And we hope that a discussion like this could assist other organizations in ensuring that the workforce are secure and their data continues to be protected even when their staff continues to work from home. About CyberTech, we are a managed security services provider with a very strong cryptography offering for payments and general purpose encryption. In this webinar, we are going to be talking about the resilience in the COVID-19 era, and I'm happy to welcome Henry Denner, who is the Information Security Officer for Gautrain Management Agency. Henry is an information security professional, very passionate about defense in-depth principle. He has spoken in many information security conferences in South Africa, including the flagship, the IT Web Security Summit. And I know that having worked with Henry for the past 3 years, he is really passionate about security and ensuring that an organization is protected wherever the data sits. For housekeeping, Q&A session will be running throughout the session. So if you have any questions, please pop it in there. We'll have a look at those questions towards the end of the event. Now, Henry, you will agree with me that COVID-19, the pandemic, and the other natural disasters, if you think about Hurricane Sally in New York, and any other global event, does not necessarily have an impact in how information security operates. However, as people adapt and change in the face of disasters, that is when information security or IT at a broad level gets involved. For example, we saw a lot of phishing attacks related to Hurricane Sally when that happened, and other hurricanes and earthquakes in Asia, and people used those pandemics or events to attack unsuspecting individuals. But the modus operandi is still the same in terms of what happens after someone has clicked a link. It's not nothing new. So if you look at it's just the usage. For example, in our case, COVID-19, as a pandemic, people are using that to attract people to click on links. So in essence, the same principles still apply. For example, patching. For me, I'm very passionate about patching. And what has since happened is that after the lockdowns announced globally by different countries, when people started working from home, we saw a lot of issues with patching because people are not connected to the corporate network, and they cannot download the necessary patches for their endpoints. And in most cases, things like WSAS servers are sitting within the corporate network. And for one to be able to download updates, they'll have to go inside the corporate network to update their computers. And again, if you look in the country like South Africa with high data costs, it also talks to what and how people approach patching. Do I download 500 megabytes of antivirus signatures if I've got only 1 gigabyte bundle? So what is your thinking around patching and how and what you have observed during the COVID-19 lockdowns?
Hi, Boland. Good morning, everyone, and all the people in the audience. Thanks for inviting me. And Boland, you are so right. The face of IT security is basically changing, but it's stayed the same. It's sort of like a conundrum because we still want to protect people and we still want things to be up to date, all the patches and all this kind of things. But we're sitting now with a distributed workforce. So the data challenge is quite a big issue. But I think it goes past that, and you've touched on VPN. A lot of organizations didn't actually have a VPN in place. I've spoken to a lot of my peers and so on, and a lot of them are having issues with VPNs because now all of a sudden you need to open up create VPNs. You have to set people up remotely, and all of that creates a lot of additional load on your IT staff, especially on your security team. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword. You need people to get into the office, but you also don't want to give them unrestricted access to the office from home via the VPN, because it just opens up a lot of other potential threats. So VPN is quite an issue, and I think we'll circle later. Yes.
Yeah, just on the VPN, it's quite an interesting thing for me because you see what happened, and we saw that a lot of organizations. That first week before the lockdown and the week of the lockdown and the week after the lockdown. And as you know, we manage a lot of networks for our customers, and they requested that we create VPNs for the employees. And those requests didn't consider the fact that is the network actually ready for those VPNs? Because if your network is not properly set up and you have that number of people coming uncontrolled through the VPN, it also adds another variable into your security.
Yeah, and the other challenge with the VPN is that you now are forcing a lot of additional traffic over your internet connectivity line into your office. So what you'll find is that people are now patching to the VPN, they're accessing systems through the VPN, whereas that would normally have happened inside of your protected network. So you're actually killing your internet bandwidth, and then you are degrading the user experience even further. So they said at home, if they've got a 3G connection at home, we've seen that the likes of the Vodacom, MTN, Cell C, they actually struggle with the load that was all of a sudden placed on those networks. So you don't have that huge bandwidth capacity that you normally had. So couple that now with the VPN, everybody going in and out of the same line in the office, and all of a sudden you have issues that users didn't have before. So you connect to the VPN for patches, but now patches don't necessarily download at the right speed. So you have a lot of retries, and that sort of like increases the bandwidth usage. So all in all, it creates a very bad user experience. I think what's critical for me is that you said the word resilient earlier on, and you really have to think about where your organization is going in terms of connectivity. Me personally, I don't like VPNs. As an organization, we are moving away from VPNs because there's no real need for the VPN if you have other ways to connect to your office. There's things like application proxies that you can use, for example, that you don't require a VPN, and there's a lot of additional security that you can apply on those devices. Plus, then you don't actually open up a line into your office for your whole network. You connect to application proxy, and you only get access to that specific application. So that really negates the requirement for a VPN. Having said that, though, if you still have legacy applications, you can't actually get away from having a VPN. I just want to circle back to patches because that's sort of like where the question started. Patches is a non-negotiable. If we don't have enough data for patches, we have to get enough data. Unfortunately, data is expensive, but if you are an enterprise, you can negotiate with the service providers to allow your users to use additional bandwidth. We've actually done that as well as an organization. When we allowed people to work from home, we went to our preferred service provider and say, look, our people are working from home. How can you help us with additional bandwidth so that we can just make sure that our people can get to the stuff that they need to get? They need to get to the data. Plus, we need to allow those machines to be patched. We need to ensure that those machines are current with the patching that is out from Microsoft. And the problem is with Windows is that often they release enhancements or quality updates, and those things are quite huge. I mean, we're not talking about megabytes, we're talking about gigabytes. Yes. And if you mentioned a 1 gig data bundle, I don't know if you guys have actually done the tests, but an hour-long video conference is going to take about 250 odd megabytes. So for people who's on a 1 gigabyte bundle, now you're in a remote work scenario. There's a lot of online meetings. So within a week, probably within a day, if you have 4 or 5 meetings in a day, that 1 gig data bundle is actually going to run out.
It's exhausted already, yes.
It's already exhausted. So the challenge is that the organization has to understand how critical security is. If they don't patch, if they don't update, your machines are going to be vulnerable. Plus now, your machines are in an unprotected space. They're sitting on a home network. They're sitting on a 3G network. You don't have all the firewalls in place. A lot of organizations don't have remote monitoring for workstations. They don't have an EDR solution. And that then becomes a real big risk. If you don't patch, it's just sort of like you're opening up a whole massive big hole into your network. You have all these devices that are trusted, but they're coming from untrusted locations. But now all of a sudden they're unpatched. So that trusted device is actually not trusted anymore. And if you want to look at it that way. So unfortunately, we can't get away from patching. We have to patch. And it doesn't matter which model you use. You can use WSUS, you can use the Windows caching facility, you can use Intune from Office 365. A patch is a patch. It doesn't matter where you patch from, it's still the same size. So as an organization, you have to make that decision and you have to realize the criticality of patching. So unfortunately, in my view, there's no getting out of it. You can't go away from not patching.
Yeah, if I'm hearing you correctly, so you're emphasizing that the organizational security policy applies whether employees are working from home or wherever they are working from. Those policies of ensuring that the endpoints are patched and updated as those updates become available still holds. And now, just to add a spanner in the works is the bring your own devices. And during the lockdown, we have dealt with within one of our customers an incident where a employee was given VPN, but on their laptop. The organization did not own the laptop, it belonged to the employee. And obviously, there was not enough protection on that laptop. There was no antivirus, and the organization was actually attacked through that laptop into the organizational network through the VPN. So these things that you are mentioning here, Henry, are real, and they have to be attended to by all organizations. Touching on the data and the communication required for one to be able to have a decent working session from home, one start looking at data sharing. And I've seen this happening quite often where someone has got a large file and they want to, which of course will not go through the email because of the policy, it will reject that size of attachment. And people are using things like Dropbox to share very sensitive information, and sometimes they don't even apply correct security levels to protect that data. What's your take on that?
So I think IT in general must become more of a dream function. They need to dream. They need to look ahead. What we found that has worked for us is that IT has moved from specifically security has moved from a controlling. I mean, you know how our networks are set up, and I'm not going to elaborate on that. But you know that I used to be a control freak. But
Yes.
with technologies, if you implement the right technology, you can have a lot of your rules relaxed, but then you beef up other rules so that you can have detection and maybe encryption and those kind of things on your data. At the end of the day, you have to protect your data. And a problem I see with IT in these days is that we are too centralized. We focused on the network. So we think that if we connect a VPN, we're secure, and we're definitely not secure. We think that if we secure the corporate network, as long as we connect to that network, we are safe. And that's, in my view, probably the worst assumption that you can make.
Right.
So the strategy that I've adopted, or the way that I look at security is sort of like a completely decentralized model. So I'm saying I'm not worried about protecting the network. For me, I want to protect where your connections are coming from and where you're connecting to. So you protect your device, your endpoint, be it your phone, your laptop, whatever that case may be, and then you protect where your data sits. So you have things like data classification, you have encryption, all those kind of things. So in essence, it shouldn't matter where your data resides. If you have the right technology implemented to protect your data, and you'll notice that I don't talk about the system, I'm talking about data. So you protect the data, and it doesn't matter if the data is at rest or in transit. If you have the right technologies able to protect your data, it really doesn't matter where the data sits. But having said that, we don't promote things like Dropbox, those kind of things, simply because we've actually enabled our staff to use other technologies. If you look at, for example, the Office 365 platform, it's got all the technologies that can give you the same as what Dropbox can give you. Plus, it comes with enterprise-grade security. You have your risk-based access, you have your multi-factor authentication, you've got all those things, and you can apply the same rules to external parties, the same way that you can apply to internal parties. So there's no reason why you need to email a 50 or 100 meg file or whatever the case may be, or upload it into Dropbox. You have the facilities in your corporate environment that you can actually utilize to give people that freedom. But the problem is, if your IT unit doesn't drive the adoption of technology and doesn't show the benefits of that technology to the users will take the easy way out. What's easier? Dropbox. Because IT will say, no, but there's all these security things that we have to think about and this and that. They don't make the job easier for the users. What we as security people need to understand is that security is an enabler. We can't control to death. If we control to death, we're going to get lots and lots of shadow IT. We're going to get people that are going to find innovative ways to share data. And it's very difficult to stop it. And especially when you bring your own device into the mix, if you don't have the right controls in place to protect your actual data and the platforms where you're connected to, then you are in deep trouble, because you wouldn't know what is actually coming your way from that untrusted device.
I like when you touched on the security of the data wherever it is, and it talks to the zero trust architecture that we have a long discussion about, Henry. And when I was thinking about this webinar and the content that we should share, I think zero trust architecture and design, I think it was critical, for example, for your organization particularly, when COVID-19 started. You know, you never had the panic of how are my users going to get updates or access the productivity tools or their emails. So I think the takeaway for people on the line is that the zero trust architecture should inform the IT spend and should govern how IT and security work together to implement technologies that work for for the users, wherever those users are, whether they are at home, on an airplane, the security should go with the user and follow the user and the data.
Absolutely.
And whatever they do, and whichever technology they use to access or process that data.
Absolutely. And I think a big barrier that we have is the monitoring aspect of devices. So you can, through group policies, you can set devices to update directly from Windows Update, or from each other, or from WSUS. But yes, the problem is, if your controlling mechanism is centralized, you have not a different choice than to make sure that your devices connect to that centralized point for the updates. So if you look at different technologies, for example, and I want to come back to the Office 365 platform, Microsoft Intune, for example, you can manage all your patching and a lot of things similar to group policies, but from a decentralized space. So as long as you have some other internet connection, you know what is happening on your devices. You know that your device is receiving updates. You know if your firewalls, for example, is on that device. You know the compliance status of that device to the policies that you've set. So we should start to broaden our horizons in terms of monitoring and managing our environments. If we keep that monitoring and managing systems centralized in a protected area, such as a corporate network or at your office, you are still going to have to rely on bringing all the devices back via VPN to your central point where you can manage. If you look at cloud technologies, there's a lot of cloud technologies that does different patching, that can do the patching and manage the patching for you. And these are all cloud-based platforms. So why are we spending money on putting infrastructure in place in our office, and then we are sort of like forcing everybody from untrusted places into our network just to do patching? In my view, it's not necessary. WSUS has got a space for servers, those kind of things, but in my view, it's old school. There's a lot better ways to look at patching than to simply force people via VPN. We have to look at how we can access our devices where they're not connected to the corporate network. Because if you're connected to the VPN, you can possibly see your antivirus updates, whatever. But what happens now when your machines are not connected? What happens if your users forget to connect to the VPN, or they just don't need the VPN, so they continue to work? They just connect to the internet, but now they're not getting updates. Antivirus is not updated. It's not talking back to systems because you don't have a VPN. So you have to think about how you are dealing with a remote workforce. In the past, it was those few people who really have a case to work from home, but now it's everybody. So for those organizations who never had that work from home or that remote workforce enabled on their systems, it's now a problem, because now they have to jump, and like you said earlier, a lot of people have to make VPNs in a hurry. And if you do things in a hurry, you forget about security. You open up VPN for all your servers, all your services, whereas you should only allow VPN for specific things. For example, you only want to allow your admins to do remote desktop, for example, to your service. But your users connecting to VPN, you don't want to give them all this access. You only want them to connect to server with a specific IP address on a specific port, so that I can access a specific application. But when you start doing things in a hurry, you just do things to help the organization to function. So you open up your system, and that's just when the trouble happens. There's a lot of use cases or case studies out there of attackers that actually bring down an organization so that they can invoke their disaster recovery plans or their business continuity plans. Because traditionally, organizations often have a lot less security on those disaster recovery sites. So what is simpler? You invoke a BCP, or you bring down an organization, they invoke the BCP, bring up the warm site or the hot site or whatever. There's a lot less security, and that's exactly where the attackers then hit. So you have to think holistically about these things, and I think what's critical is how you address your security architecture. So that whole zero trust model, it has to be part of it, but you have to look at things holistically. And traditionally, IT is very silent when they look at business continuity and those kind of things. And it should move away. IT and specifically IT security is so integral into the business. You cannot run it in isolation. It has to be part of your business continuity from the pure security portion of it. Because if you fail over to a DR site and that DR site is less secure, then why do you have all the efforts? Why did you have all of your plans, but you didn't consider the actual security of that disaster recovery site? And there's a lot of those incidents. You can go search the web. There's a lot of those articles around of attackers actually doing just that. So it's critical that you think of these things holistically, and it starts with your architecture and that zero trust model that you were talking about.
Fully agree with you, Henry. I think we have sort of honed in onto the remote workforce, and one can deduce the remote workforce to the endpoint and the protection of an endpoint, and not only ending at the protection, but ensuring that the same visibility you have when someone is at the corporate network, you still have it even if they're working from home, and you can apply the same architecture, the same security policies wherever the user is working from home, or wherever the user is working. Now, the endpoint protection, I mean, has evolved over a number of years, and quite recently with very interesting technologies that cover or that sits on top of an antivirus. And we've talked about antivirus patching, and you've mentioned that it's critical that the antivirus is patched. But what is your take on other technologies for the protection of an endpoint and the data that sits on the endpoint and the monitoring of an endpoint?
So for me, the endpoint is probably the area in our organization that receives the most attention at the moment, purely not just because we're in COVID, but it's been on our radar for about 2 years. So my security model has been for the past 2 years to seriously protect and be able to manage and monitor the endpoints remotely. So I've mentioned earlier that we have a decentralized model, and for me, it doesn't matter where that endpoint sits, you must have visibility. That's the first thing. But secondly, you can't rely on antivirus. You need something that can do heuristic scanning. You need something that can look at processes that's running, something that can do baselining, anomaly behavior. A big problem that we see with attackers these days is that they're using tools such as PowerShell to actually exfiltrate data from the organization. Now that's a big problem. Antivirus, PowerShell is not something that's blacklisted by antivirus because it's a known tool, it's a Windows tool. So if somebody fires up a PowerShell, generally it's for administrative purposes, but we've also seen some of the processes in the Microsoft estate that actually run PowerShell scripts in the backend. So unknowing to you, when you launch a process on your workstation, it's actually doing a PowerShell script in the backend, talking to a cloud service or a server or whatever the case can be. So you can't stop PowerShell scripts. But now your attacker comes in and it actually starts using PowerShell scripts to connect to your domain controllers to exfiltrate information. And there's a multi-layer approach that you have to look at. So we know that attackers need admin privileges to get to a lot of things in it, but they don't need to query AD. I've seen where attackers, when we do our simulations, I've seen where they can, with a normal user account, run a PowerShell script or something to that extent, that they can actually get a dump of your usernames on your AD. So now you have to look at how you configure your AD. So it's not just your endpoint anymore. Now it's also how you configure your attributes in AD. But where your EDR tool comes in is in the anomaly behavior on the machine. So if I'm an admin and I log in 2 or 3 times a week onto my service, I run scripts, but all of a sudden I'm sitting on there for like 2 hours and I'm running various amounts of queries. You need that EDR tool to actually look into the inside of what is running on that script.
Correct.
And there's tools out there that can do that. So the tools can see there's a PowerShell script and it's okay, it's just to enable auditing or disable auditing or whatever the case may be. But you can set the tools up to alert you on different levels. You can whitelist, blacklist users, but at the end of the day, antivirus will not actually look into processes. It's pattern based. So it cannot detect what you're running in PowerShell script. And that's why you need tools for some form of machine learning or AI intelligence or something that you can train to look for certain commands inside of PowerShell. And I'm just using PowerShell scripts as an example. There's many other things that you can do with them as well. But the biggest threat that I've seen with when we do penetration testing is PowerShell scripts. Your SOCs, your SIEMs, your tools can see there's a PowerShell script running, but it doesn't actually look inside of what the PowerShell script is. And that's why you need that additional tool. You need that EDR component that can actually look into what that script is running. It looks into the actual index, not the indexing, the text inside of that script. And if you don't have the capability, your attacker is simply going to jump on your network, is going to run these scripts, and your SOC, your security people won't know the better, because the tools that they've got doesn't actually give them the visibility.
And we have seen a lot of attacks, Henry, through our security operations center, where exactly what you have seen has happened, where PowerShell is being used for nefarious activities within the network, and with a proper antivirus, with proper signature updates on the antivirus. And we have seen instances where PowerShell is used to disable security controls within the network, and then the attacker can then do whatever they want once those security controls have been disabled. I think you're right. I think antivirus, if an organization is only relying on antivirus for the security of the endpoint, with now the people working from home, I think they are in a very dangerous situation. I think endpoint detect and respond technologies have revolutionized how endpoints are protected, and I mean the capabilities they bring forward at least assists in protecting these attacks. And we've seen and we have assisted a lot of organizations in protecting the endpoints. What's your take on multi-factor authentication, Henry, with work from home?
The critical aspect, enable it before the attackers enable it for you.
That's a good one.
So I'm a big fan of multi-factor authentication, or MFA. I'll just call it the acronym. I'm actually on a drive to try and get the organization away from passwords. If you look at any attack, and probably 99% of the time, there's identity compromise.
Correct.
So username and password, and we all know if an attacker wants to get to data, it needs an entry point, it needs a username and password. So it's two things that they need. So now when you add that additional layer of MFA, it makes it a little bit more difficult. It's not impossible, and we've seen there are cases where attackers have found ways to bypass MFA, but it's not so simple as to just take the password hash and try and decrypt or run it against the random table and get the password. So I'm a big fan of MFA, and I want to come back to the cloud tools that Microsoft offer. There's some really awesome stuff that they do with MFA. It's normally, it depends on your licensing, obviously, but if you have the right licensing, it's there, you can switch it on. And the beauty of it is not a whole infrastructure that you have to set up. It's all there, it's a few ticks and you enabled. But having said that, there's also other tools on your networks and on your applications on-prem that you can actually switch it on for. And you definitely should. If there's nothing else that you do with your security strategy this year and you don't have it, I would say do MFA. It's the one thing that can really slow down an attack. It's just a lot more difficult to interject into MFA because you've got codes that cycles constantly. Those things are valid depending on what application you use. It's from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. So in essence, if an attacker does manage to guess that thing, he's going to have it for 30 seconds. or 60 seconds or whatever that case may be. So it really is the way to go. You cannot get away from it. I actually want to be as bold and says, have a password, have a simple password, have a password that never changes, but have MFA, because MFA is the one factor that will actually help you protect your identity. Passwords alone, it doesn't matter how long the passwords are. With the number of breaches that we've seen lately, in a lot of cases, those identities that are breached, those passwords are dumped on the dark web. So you go, you buy a random table or you buy a password list, and I mean it takes minutes. And you know we promote complex passwords. So you have 9 or 12 or 15 characters password, whatever you have, upper, lowercase, number, special characters. It doesn't matter, because every time that there's a breach, those things are uploaded to the dark web. These guys run it against the hackers, run it against the tables, the password lists, and you get your passwords get cracked in minutes, if not seconds. So this whole thing about long passwords, complex passwords, yes, it's good, but the era that we're living in with the tools and the resources that hackers have access to, MFA really is the one way that you have to look. And even if you use biometrics, I mean, biometrics is quite a hot topic, because you can't really fake somebody's biometrics, but you can steal their biometrics. And the problem with biometrics is you only have so much. So if normally you capture 1 or 2 or 3 fingers, for example, if you use fingers. So if that is compromised, you only have so many fingers left. You only have 1 eye, 2 eyes. So and you have 1 face. So if those things are compromised, that's it. You have to fall back into other technologies. So biometrics are good, but I still insist MFA is the big factor that you have to consider for your identity protection specifically.
Okay, all right. Let's wind it down, Henry. I'd just like, in closing, just to touch on incident reporting. You see, in an organization, when it's business as normal or as usual, when someone has got a problem with their laptop or they suspect something is happening in their laptop, the IT administrator or the security administrator can walk across the floor and assist the person. Now, with work from home and at odd hours of the day, how should organization be gearing themselves up? Because the security guys are also at home, and they're not necessarily available to offer that help or to attend to whatever the user is experiencing and be able to help that user before a breach happens. What's your take on how organizations should prepare for incident reporting, or maybe they should start looking at changing their incident reporting mechanism if it's not adequate to feed work from home strategy?
I think there's a couple of issues there. First of all, with everybody being at home, you don't have physical access to a device. So normally users don't have administrative access to their computers. So that's the first problem. So now a user has got a problem. They phone you, you try and you help them on the phone, but now what happens, Windows says, oh, enter your admin credentials. So now what do? Does the admin give you that password and then change the password? Or do you use a tool such as TeamViewer, or even with Microsoft Teams, you have the remote with desktop sharing. There's risks either way. When we were breached in 2014, one of the tools that the hackers used was TeamViewer. And we all know TeamViewer. It's one of the most used tools out there for remote assistance. It works brilliantly. It works well. In this day and age, you can't survive without a remote support tool. It's just impossible. You cannot get away from it. But now you have to educate, and I think that's a very, very strong component. You have to educate your staff, your users, on what they should look out for when somebody tries to remote assist them. You should educate your administrators on how they should use these tools. But then over and above that, you have to, if you have a SOC, you have to set up a sort of use cases or playbooks where you detect remote users or remote access tools being fired up on a machine, it should generate an alert for you. Because normally you will not, a user should not fire up a TeamViewer session or a remote view session unless they have an issue. So I want to come back to that zero trust. There's this thing that we say, trust but verify. So if I get from our SOC, I get reports on TeamViewer or remote viewer sessions, remote access sessions. And you actually need to go back and you have to go and verify with users, listen, did you request assistance? Did these people help you? So that you can just get that comfort that these things are done above board. Where we are now, you can't go back a week later. So if somebody does a remote session or whoever fires up TeamViewer, for example, on their laptop, I need to know about it. I need to make sure that that user is doing it for the right reasons. So it comes back to the ability to remote monitor. So if you have a remote workforce, they sit at home, they're not connected to the VPN, and they start to fire up these tools, then it becomes a problem because now you don't have control of who's accessing those users' workstations. So it becomes a big problem. And you can't blacklist an application because you can do so via antivirus. But then the problem is, if the machine has got an issue and you need to remote support, they can't fire up that session because it's blacklisted with the AV. So it becomes a double-edged sword again. So for me, the crux is the monitoring part. Knowing what's happening on your endpoints is what the crux is all about.
And the other issue there, Henry, is social engineering. Is the IT technician your IT technician, or is it just someone else who wants access to that person's laptop so they can in turn get access to the network? Yeah. And I think it takes us down to what should we be recommending for organizations in this time. One, I think it's awareness. You've already mentioned it. Users need to start being aware of various protection mechanisms in their endpoints and how they should report incidents. And again, I think it's the re-emphasis of the information security awareness that the organization should and must do. For example, phishing awareness exercises, they should not click on links. It's also spoken about multi-factor authentication, very important. The monitoring of administrator activity, I think during this time is even critical. And I think importantly, protect your endpoints. I don't know if you have anything else in the recommendations, Henry, that you want to add?
Definitely. You know, the human brain is a funny thing. The human brain learns through repetition. So a lot of time when we do awareness, we put people in a room, we show them a slideshow, and you say, you shall not do this, you shall do that. And I've seen it doesn't work. You can set people in a room 10 times, it doesn't work because eventually they sort of like just phase out and nothing gets into them. So for me, the best way to get things to showcase to users what can happen is to do realistic simulations. I love doing simulations. I've actually scaled down on my actual awareness sessions and scaled up a lot of the simulations that we do. Because with the simulations, you can show the users exactly what is doable in their environment. So from doing social engineering to doing fake BCP exercises, all this kind of things. If you do these things often, the user starts to understand what it's all about and what attackers can really do and what they can achieve in your system. You have to find the thing that talks to your users. All our organizations, we've got different cultures in our organizations. You have to know your users, understand how your users perceive and what they think of security, and involve them. Move away from this, from the naughty stick. You know, oh, you did this bad. And go onto a model where you rather praise people for doing stuff right. So you do your simulations and at the end say, you know what, we tested 50 people and these 10 people did so great. They reported the incident. They gave me all the information. And that's what you want. Because at the end of the day, if your users don't report things, you would know. there's very few systems that really are really effective when it comes to phishing. So your users is your biggest mechanism for actually telling that there's phishing exercises, there's phishing emails. When we started our new security program a few years ago, we had very few users who actually would report. And that becomes a problem because you send out a phishing email to, let's say, 100 people, and maybe 10 people click, but you don't get anything back. What you want to get to is a point where even if 10 people click, but if 5 people have actually responded and say, listen, here's something happening. It's an early alert. It's an early warning mechanism for you to say, listen, there's something that's happening. You can go and look at your logs. You can say, oh, there's 50 people who got this email. So there's a problem. You can see what that phishing email does, and you can very quickly go onto your firewalls, onto your workstation firewalls, onto your AVs, and blacklist those domains, for example, of the ports that those things are using. So you have to train your users, and you have to show them the value in reporting. And you sort of have to bring them into your security program. You can't have security sitting there and then your users sitting there. It's a global, it's a holistic effort. You have to bring your users into your program. And I think for me, that is something that I'm very passionate about, that whole notion of building the human firewall. I'm very passionate about that, because that's really where we can protect our organizations.
Oh, great. Thanks, Henry. We will now move on to the question and answers. I see that we've got a number of questions on the list here. The first one is, what has the effect of poor resilience been in this time of crisis? For me, I'll take that one, Henry, and you can add if you want. I can simply answer it as follows. You will be breached. It will be a breach, and we have dealt through a breach during the lockdown, and simply because that organization didn't have a proper network, and they allowed a lot of people, or they have a proper network. Someone was given VPN access on their own devices without EDR proper protection, and the attackers used that laptop to launch an attack into the organization. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Henry.
I think I didn't get the question that clear, but there was something about resilience in there, if I'm not mistaken.
So the question is, how it says, what is your opinion? Yeah.
What has the effect of poor resilience been in this time of crisis?
Okay, I think from me is we need to understand what resilience really is about. Just because you have a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan doesn't mean you are a resilient organization. You have to look at what resilience means, and you'll probably get different definitions, but it really comes down to how quickly you can identify an issue, how quickly you can respond, and how quickly you can continue to operate, not recover, but how you can continue to operate. And that has been so true for this whole COVID. If you look at organizations, some organizations walked out of the office, they walked into their homes, they were operational. Other organizations struggled for weeks and weeks and weeks just to get access to their emails, because the emails are still all on-prem. So it's VPNs that had to be set up, and yes, they could access them on their phones, but it really is about how quickly and how effectively you can continue to operate when you change from one environment to the next.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Another question here is, what, in your opinion, is top of mind for all CISOs in South Africa? I'm going to answer that from the Cybersecurity Operations Center perspective, and this is what we see. And I'm saying this because, yes, the CISOs might have something that's on top of mind, and there is reality. And what we see through the Cybersecurity Operations Center is the reality. And I can tell you now, what's on top of my mind is the endpoints. That is the biggest headache organizations have. You can buy the best of the best firewalls and create endless segmentation of your network. But if your endpoints are not protected, you still have a huge problem. Henry, I don't know if you want to take on that.
Yeah. I fully agree with you, Boland. But the second thing that keeps me up is where is my data and what's happening with my data.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys saw the POPI Act will now be, we all have to be ready by 1st of July 2021. So we basically have just over a year. And what POPI is giving us is exactly that question. Where is my data and what's happening with my data? And I think there's a lot of organizations that still hasn't answered that question. And that's where your endpoint solutions really come in. Because you can't protect your data if you don't have a proper endpoint management and monitoring solution.
Yep. Another question here, Henry. What is your opinion on disabling multi-factor authentication from certain locations, such as the office? What is this? Disappeared now.
What is your opinion on disabling MFA from certain locations, such as from the office, for example? And basically, an opinion is being sought after here because laptops can be stolen, for example. So what is your opinion on disabling MFA when in office as opposed to outside of office?
If I have to tackle that, Henry, for me, it's again zero trust. So zero trust architecture says that you don't trust any network, including your corporate network. So which would mean that you will have to implement multi-factor authentication wherever the user is, whether within the corporate network or from the home Wi-Fi.
Yeah, Boland, I'm going to be slightly controversial here.
Yep.
And, so depending on the tools and the platform that you use, you may have access to a lot of different options. So if you don't have a platform that can give you different risk-based scenarios, so let's say, for example, I'm in the office, I'm on my laptop, I connect to the server, then don't do MFA. But providing that, there's no compromise, indicator of compromise on my device. All the patching is up to date, AV is up to date, firewall is on, and there's no indicator of compromise that my user ID has been compromised on the dark web. So for me, it's not black and white. You can't say yes or no. For me, it's what are the risks that you are willing to accept for a device to connect to your systems with or without MFA. Once again, depending on the tools that you use, there's some of the tools out there that you can do risk-based authentication. But that says that if you come from a protected zone and you have all these rules, compliance rules set on your machines, then you can access without MFA. But you have to be very, very sure and be willing to accept that risk if you go that route. The easy way is to say MFA all the way out, but I do think that if you have the right tools in place and you can apply the right risk matrix to your connections, then you can lax your MFA. But not all the platforms, the MFA platforms out there, can give you sort of like a risk-based choices that you can make. So the simple answer is, and I agree there with Boland, if you want to be safe, just enable MFA. It's not. Just think about it. How often do you log in? Because normally your MFA is applied on your initial connection. It's not every time you unlock your workstation. So worst case scenario, people are going to have to enter it once or twice a day. It's not every time that they go to the bathroom or they make a cup of tea, they have to enable MFA. So you have to weigh your risks versus the usability of the system. And I think that's for each organization to decide. For me, I support disabling it from trusted locations, but there's very strict criteria that the machines and the identities have to adhere to, and also the platform where they're connecting to before we don't force the MFA.
Correct. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of risk assessment. And understanding, as you said earlier in the conversation, you need to classify your data. You need to know where the user is going and then make those decisions of whether or not to enable MFA when the user is within the corporate network. All right, I don't see any more questions coming through.
There is another question. Do you follow a security framework? And connected to that is what your opinion is about data classification.
My opinion on data classification is it's critical.
Absolutely.
And it is going to be even more critical with POPI now becoming law and all organizations enforced to comply by 1st of July next year. So the classification is important. It's not an easy thing to do, particularly if you are starting it from scratch, but it has to be done. We have a legislation now that has to be complied to, so it's critical.
Boland, I just want to touch on the frameworks. There's basically 3 frameworks in my mind that's out there. If in government, you have to comply to the DPSA's framework, but that framework is loosely based on COVID and ISO. So for general discussions, we normally talk about ISO 27000 series, or we talk about the NIST framework. NIST is a lot more comprehensive, and there's a lot more work that goes into NIST. But the key thing that you have to understand with frameworks is that just by following a framework doesn't mean you are secure. A framework is just a set of rules, a set of controls. You cannot sit back and say, well, even if you are ISO 27000 certified, you cannot sit back and think, well, now I'm certified in ISO 27000, my system is certified, I'm fine. You're not. So frameworks are good. I would say look at the 27000 series, but also look at NIST, because there's some, especially from the cyber end, there's a bit more from the cyber end. And I think this the NIST framework for me, I like the flow with the 5 stages, the identify, protect, recover, respond.
Yeah, it's actually very comprehensive.
Yeah. But just don't think that you protect it. You will not get hacked if you follow a framework. That doesn't happen.
That is very true. That is very true, Henry.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, and this is regarding any challenges that you experience or see with everyone going into cloud.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, can I take it? So a lot of people are scared of cloud. Cloud is very intimidating, but there's a lot of good technologies in cloud. It becomes critical and key as to which cloud service provider that you use. Understand one thing, that if you go onto, let's say, the Microsoft Azure cloud or Office 365 or AWS, you're not secure. You have to make your tenant secure. So those organizations, Microsoft, Azure, Microsoft, and Amazon, and so on, they provide a secure backend, but your tenant by default is not secure. So you have to go and make sure that you apply the right rules, the right controls on that tenant, so that your tenant becomes secure. Cloud gives you endless options and possibilities. It makes managing your workforce a lot easier. It makes monitoring and managing your endpoints a lot easier, your users, where your data sits, what's happening with your data. But you have to make sure that you follow the same rules and the same principles that you would have followed if you were dealing with it on-prem, but adapted to the cloud environment. Public cloud is not necessarily any less secure. It's as secure as how you make it. So if you have public cloud and you don't enable MFA, it's your fault. It's not the platform's fault. It's you that have to make sure that that platform is secure. So me myself, I'm a big fan of cloud. It's made my life a lot easier, but it's also given us a lot more controllability, manageability, and monitoring capabilities, especially now with the distributed workforce that we have with this lockdown.
Yep. Okay. We have come to the end of our webinar. Henry, thank you very much for your insights that you have shared today. And thanks for the technical team that organized this, and those who asked questions and those who attended. Thank you very much. It's been a very fruitful discussion, and we're looking forward to the second installment of the CyberTech webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Boland, for inviting me, and thanks to everyone.